Let's speak now about how the UK government's latest traffic light system is working. Jill Starley-Grainger is a travel journalist. She joins us from Haute-Savoie on the French-Swiss border near Lake Geneva. Jill, does the system work?
I think it's very confusing and chaotic, and now there are going to be a lot of people who are on holiday in Mexico who thought everything was going to be fine, they could quarantine, and now they're facing paying more than £2,000 per person to quarantine in one of these quite unpleasant sounding quarantine hotels. It's very confusing, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it.
Well, the rhyme or reason I think the government might say is that virus rates in those countries change, the detection of variants changes, and some of our viewers might also say, in a pandemic, people who travel abroad to an amber list country really do take a risk. They do so knowing that there is a risk and should have to accept that things can change.
That's absolutely true. I wouldn't advise anybody to go to an amber list country now without having a plan to deal with what happens if things change. But the confusing situation is when you look at the coronavirus rates, like even if you look at Mexico, for example, its rates are currently lower than the UK. So you can see why people don't understand why they're having to panic and try to get back or face this very expensive problem when they go back. And there's been inconsistency throughout this. Now, in the early days of the pandemic, it was much more understandable, but now we can all see what's happening. And if you look at the case with France, where France was put on this so-called Amber Plus list based on rates in Reunion Island, which is 6,000 miles from mainland France, people from mainland France were going to have to quarantine going into the UK, but conversely, people from Reunion Island were not going to have to quarantine. It just didn't make any sense. Everybody picked up on it quite quickly. So it is quite confusing, and it doesn't seem to be led by science all the time.
What do you make of India being taken off the red list?
I mean, it's good news for India. It's difficult for people who are in neighboring countries who also seem to have lower rates. So again, there's a little bit of confusion there, but it's obviously great news for people who have family and friends who live in India. And if you're doubly vaccinated now, it means that you don't have to go through the quarantine. So obviously we want more people to be vaccinated, and anything we can do to encourage people to be vaccinated is helpful. But again, if you look at India compared to some of the other countries, you do question why India suddenly come off, while some other countries such as the Maldives are still on the red list, who have lower rates of infection and higher rates of vaccination.
I've spoken to many people in recent weeks who say they look at all the rules, discuss the possibility of those rules changing, and think it is better to skip a foreign trip this year. How representative is that?
I've spoken to a lot of people who have agreed, and I would largely say you shouldn't book a trip until the last minute is really my advice.
Jill Starley-Grainger, thanks so much for speaking to us.